All right, so let's talk about what we do with the fossil fuels and the natural gas after we have it. We need to burn it. Now, remember that these hydrocarbons in crude oil, especially, are these long chain hydrocarbons and lots of hydrogen. And depending on how long the chain is, the ones that are really short, they go off the column, the very top of those fractionating columns. And the ones that have long chains of carbons, they stay at the bottom. They're all separated out. And so what we're going to do is we're going to react this basically with oxygen to make CO2 and water and some other bits and pieces of other things. And that basically is how combustion is going to work. Interestingly, when we burn things like fossil fuels like crude oil, we do have some impurities in there. But methane, because it is a gas, burns very cleanly. Methane basically only makes water and carbon dioxide, whereas if we burn long chain hydrocarbons, you get some incomplete combustion and some bits and pieces here of carbon species that did not burn completely, because these long chain hydrocarbons are hard to completely burn. But not so with methane. So methane is a good alternative to coal and liquid crude oil, because it burns so clean. We get water and carbon dioxide. These fossil fuels can create electricity, right? We talked about our chemical plant. We're going to go in there. It's going to go in through the turbine. Again, you can see how big these things are. It's going to generate electricity. Look at that. That's the generator. And then it's going to go off to our homes. Now some of the advantages of oil and natural gas is that they are very dense energy-wise and are fairly easy to combust. It's a very straightforward process. This process of manufacturing them is very straightforward, so they can be very straightforward to use. But there are some environmental consequences, some disadvantages to using these. Whenever we mine coal, of course, we're going to have habitat destruction. And coal and liquid and crude oil, when it's burned, releases pollutants. And I think we talked about all that in our last, one of our last videos. Now, one thing that we can do to save energy is what's called cogeneration. Cogeneration is where I'm going to use the energy, some of the energy from the generation of the plant. So when the heat is produced from electricity generation, we're going to use that heat to take care of a building. Remember that the second law of thermodynamics says that whenever you go to one form of energy to another, you're always going to get heat produced. And when we generate electricity, we also get heat produced. And so we're going to use that heat that's co-generated with the electricity to do some other things. When we talked about oil and petroleum extraction, also just not with coal, but extracting through a well, underlying rock layers and all of that, what can happen is we can get problems with water. So in order to extract, especially bitumen, which is a thick semi-solid form of petroleum, this is the one in Canada, we need lots of water. In fact, they're really concerned in this part of Canada that it's going to use all of their fresh water to get this oil out of these rock formations. Some of the environmental consequences of crude oil and petroleum, we can have spills. We've heard of oil spills. We're going to talk more about oil spills and how to take care of them when we look at aquatic pollution in Unit 8. We also get habitat loss and fragmentation when you have to drive through these pipelines, right? So the oil has got to go from where it is extracted to where it is refined. And these pipelines can have environmental consequences as well. Tar sands is particularly a problem because it can, this bitumen is very impure, and it has a lot of impurities in it. And these impurities can get into the water and pollute the surrounding environment. Hydraulic fracking has its own problems. The gas itself is clean to burn, right? We're only going to get CO2 and water. But when you're fracturing the rock below these formations, they don't really know how much of the fracking fluid and the flowback water is actually getting caught into the rock and possibly getting into the water, the groundwater. Also, there has been some speculation that there could be an increase in earthquakes in these areas, although that has not been proven. So this well leaking or contamination in fracking, that's really what you're going to hear the most as a disadvantage. And these leaks, especially the drilling fluids that they use, that they pump down into the rock in order to get it to fracture, can be very toxic to plants and animals and things like that. And then, of course, the depletion of surface water to do that. So overall, the environmental consequences of all of these fossil fuels, of course, is going to be the production of ancient carbon dioxide, which is going into the environment, into the carbon cycle as well.